Are you in the process of working on something with James Wan?
I am working on something with James Wan and his producing partner, Michael Clear.
Welcome to Convo Fango. Today we are joined by It Lives Inside director Bishal Dutta. I should have asked
Great
you
to be
about the
here.
last name too. I got the first name, but I should have checked
It's
on that.
perfect. It was
We got
perfectly
it?
pronounced. Yes,
Yeah, baby.
absolutely.
All right. Amazing. All right. I'm so excited to chat with you. The moment that I was watching this movie, I wasn't even done with it yet. And I was like, I got to talk to this guy. Like, we got to talk to
Amazing.
you. So there's kind of like elements of what I would like to describe as like an Indian Nightmare on Elm Street. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I don't want people to think we've got like a wisecracking demon here or anything like that. But it definitely had echoes of that for me. Was that something that you were thinking about at all when you were making
I
this?
think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street was such a massive influence, and certainly Poltergeist was an influence, and that kind of era of cinema. And it's kind of that Amblin adjacent
Mm-hmm.
sort of horror that is that was so exciting to me. And the Stephen King stuff, I read it like a bunch of times while making the movie. And it just felt like there was an opportunity to do a movie that tapped into some primal fears, some primal insecurities, but then to kind of further the conversation by making it specific to my experience and the experience of many other Indian Americans around this country, around the world. So that was very much the project of the film, was to have this very kind of familiar and sturdy foundation, but within that foundation to explore something that felt unique.
Amazing. I love that. And you just kind of touched upon it right now, but your main character, Sam, is very much of two worlds in more ways than one. And I think it's relatable for a lot of people. I mean, we are now like generations and generations of mix. So many of us are like Indian American, Mexican American, whether you're first generation or second generation, that is like such a common thing now. So I think so many of us feel kind of this weird in between, and you captured that so perfectly, but you did it in ways that are even like visual, like her wardrobe. We got like an Evil Dead shirt at
Oh,
one
love
point,
it. Amazing. Love it. Absolutely.
but mixed with like
And
traditional Indian attire. Was that something that you where it was very important to you to convey, I'm guessing?
100% it was. And I think you just tapped perfectly into this idea of someone living in two worlds. And what was important to me was that as personal as the film is, as specific as the film is, that it tapped into a very much a universal feeling, that it didn't limit itself to a very small specific audience. Because I feel that what you're saying about people living in two worlds, I think it's true in so many different contexts today and across lines of race and gender and however one identifies. There's a certain feeling that who you are at home may not be who you are outside, and there's a clash of those two things. And I think this particular conflict that Sam has with her parents and then at school, it just felt like there was an opportunity again to bifurcate her experience and create this sort of binary world, but then to say nobody ever really does live in the binary. Nobody is one or the other. That everybody kind of synthesizes identity from thesis and antithesis, right? So that, I guess, was the sort of intellectual grounding of the movie. But then, to your point, it was very much about turning that intellectual idea into something visceral. I mean, I think movies have to be visceral. I think they have to be felt more than they have to be thought about. And in this case, it was really about taking that and imbuing that sort of bifurcation into every element of the film. I mean, for example, with the music of the film, composer Wes Hughes, who I've worked with a long time, we were using these traditional Indian instruments like the tambura and manipulating and distorting them in very sort of American ways, like Trent Reznor, for example, that kind of thing. So we were always thinking about how can we make the two worlds clash in every part of the filmmaking.
I love that so much. And it was just it like it's very rare that I see it done in this way that just so perfectly captures it in every element. Like everything you're looking at, everything you're hearing, you're living in Sam's world of duality. And I just like that was one of my favorite elements of this.
Amazing.
Aside from the fact that there's little hints to she's a nerd for like Evil Dead and things like
Right,
that.
exactly. Just like I was, those were little touches, and there's just so many opportunities within a film to fill it with kind of visual clues and fun things. I mean, for example, the mascot of the school we based around the werewolf from Ginger Snaps. There's just so many opportunities to pay homage because I felt like what was a great opportunity in this film, as much as this kind of dramatic cultural story was in the foreground, I wanted to take place in kind of this aesthetic world of the horror movies I grew up in. And so, for example, you know, when they go up into the attic, we tried to model that after the attic from the opening of Hellraiser. And I just wanted the audience to feel like they were inside of this constructed horror world of these movies that I love so much.
There's something cool that does to you, I think, subconsciously while you're watching it as well, because there's elements that feel slightly familiar but unfamiliar. So again, you're clashing that duality because it's a monster, it's a demon. You're basing it on Indian folklore. A lot of us are not familiar with that,
Right.
but you're putting it into kind of these somewhat familiar kind of feeling things, but it's just so it makes you uncomfortable because you're like, I kind of know this, but I don't know this. I'm not really too familiar with the rules of how this goes and what works and what doesn't. Right?
And what was so fun about it, really to that end, is bringing kind of Indian mythology to the Western world and to Western cinema. There was a feeling that, okay, I've heard these stories growing up and these kind of ghost stories, these demon stories, but there's nothing in here that isn't universal to everybody around me. And that's what was so exciting. It felt like we were doing something different, but the more that I pulled our stories into, you know, this particular context, the more I realized everybody's going to get this. Everybody's going to understand these core fears if I can communicate them properly. So again, to your point, it was that the more specific the film got, the more universal it started to feel.
Amazing. Also, this is something that I like preach all the freaking time. Every culture has our unique boogeymen. We all have this list of like, these are the tales that we heard growing up. And I feel like it's such an untapped well in
Yes.
horror. And I'm like, there's so like all of us have all of these things that we could pull from. And I'm just so glad to see this original fresh take. You introduced me to a demon and a monster that I'm not familiar with. And now I have a new fear unlocked. So thanks. I'm like,
That's
shit.
amazing. I mean, let me tell you where it came from. And actually, this movie came from a story that my grandfather used to tell. And supposedly, as a young man in India, he went to a family friend's house, and his friend's daughter was carrying around a mason jar, an empty mason jar, and she would talk to it. And one day he was like, "Hey, you know, there's nothing in there, right? Like, just making sure." And she got mad at him, and she opened the jar and, you know, threw something at him. Of course, nothing came out. But then my grandfather went home, and just weird stuff started happening. He's hearing galloping horses in the middle of the night. People are knocking all hours of the day. Nobody's there. And then the big one, he leaves a pack of peanuts out one day. He turns around, he hears chewing, and the peanuts are gone, right? And my grandfather just is out. He dips in that moment. He's out of there. But that was a story that was, you know, that is just like, I grew up hearing it, and I was like, this is interesting. There's something really here that I feel like we could tap into. And then reading all these interesting mythologies, I landed on the Pishas, and I was like, this thing is the embodiment of isolation and loneliness and anxiety. And it felt like it was so current. You know, that's the beautiful thing about these boogeymen that you're talking about, is that they are embodiments of things that we are all dealing with all the time. That's why I think more people should be making movies about these boogeymen.
Universal boogeymen. Let's get it.
Yeah. Love it.
I hate everything about the story you just told me, by the way, your grandpa. Like, I love it, but I hate it also. I'm like, nope, I would have dipped out real quick.
Yeah. It was quick. He was there for like a day or two, and he was out. He was
He
gone.
said bye.
Yeah, he said bye.
So if you had to transport a demon, let's say for some reason you are the keeper and the caretaker of a demon, what receptacle would you choose? Would you go mason jar? Would you go like a little
I
something
wouldn't do the mason
jazz?
jar personally. Personally, I wouldn't. That seems a little flimsy. I mean, what's unbreakable? Those Nokia phones are pretty unbreakable. You know, I'd put it in one of those maybe to the USB port, right?
Oh my God. Is that the premise for the sequel? Did you just give away
That's
the
it.
sequel?
I think I just figured it out with you on the phone. Yeah, they're gonna
Amazing.
put it in a Nokia phone. Yeah, absolutely.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for. Help me help you. So two movies that I like in particular really, really enjoyed this year are Talk to Me and It Lives Inside. And I think
Yeah.
a couple of the things that these have in common are their original stories, and they also feature not just one, but a multiple, like a cast of characters that I actually give a shit about. So the stakes
Right.
feel very high, to the point where I'm like, if something happens to the mom or the dad or the friend, like, I'm gonna riot. Like, this is not going to
Yes.
be okay. Like, what do you think is the key to creating characters that the audience is that heavily invested in?
Well, first of all, I love Talk to Me. I thought it was the coolest movie and I had the best time seeing it. I've seen it twice. I plan to see it again. But that film also had that same sort of effect where I cared so much about those characters. And when the film had me completely in its grasp and it knew exactly when I was at my most vulnerable and punched me in the face with it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Um, that is great filmmaking. That's a command over audience, and part of it comes from, I think, really trusting actors. I thought the actors in that film were amazing, and I'm so proud of the actors in this film. Megan Suri, for example, she brought so much to the character, and my approach generally is I try to write as much as I can onto the page when I am writing of the characters, and it feels kind of surface. People are talking about what they feel, and then as we get into the process of figuring out, you know, how do we bring this to life, what I find is that the actors internalize so much interesting stuff that is underneath the dialogue that then when I get in the editing room, I feel like I can cut so much dialogue because their faces are doing so much of the work. And I think it's that sort of general approach with characters where with the actors, we try not to reference other characters in movies. We try to talk about real people in our lives because that's really what makes the horror genre so compelling and why it has so often not relied on kind of the traditional movie star, why it has always demanded a certain kind of everyman quality to its characters. I think Talk to Me has this, I hope our film has this, that you can go to these movies and say, that's my family. In some respect, that's my family, because what's so important is that the audience can kind of transport themselves into these characters, right? So I think that's really what makes these kinds of movies special, is that we're trying to make real people in the audience feel like they're right up there on the screen.
Absolutely nailed it, because it just, the whole thing just felt very relatable, and I think it's going
Amazing.
to be, as you said, universally relatable for a lot of people.
Thank you.
If you were to program a double feature with It Lives Inside,
Mm.
what would you pair it with and why?
Oh man, there are so many. I think the one I would pair it with is probably John Carpenter's Christine. Not because I think, you know, I think Christine is one of the greatest films ever made, but I remember watching that film and first of all, finding its genre iconography to be just unbelievable, right? The flaming car is so apocalyptic and so interesting. But I remember that film, my first viewing, thinking like, this film affords so much interiority and so much kindness, almost really empathy towards its teenage characters. And the sort of Keith Gordon performance, you remember as they're driving to the garage at the end, it's such a layered and nuanced performance. So that one was really a kind of key reference for me as like the tone I wanted to strike, that this is a real character piece, that the horror isn't Michael Myers invading the suburbs, right? It's not that in this one. In Christine, it's very much something coming from within, a yearning, this kind of loneliness. And so that was a film that I mean, it was such a cornerstone for me.
Amazing. Also, you touched upon it here, but I feel like I have such an appreciation for a title that is doing way more than you realize until you watch the
Yes.
movie. And this is very much that instance. It Lives Inside. After watching it, I'm like, it has
It
500
means
different
a lot of
meanings
things,
after
right?
watching. Yeah.
We were so happy when we landed on it because you're absolutely right. I mean, as you know, the audience that hasn't seen it yet, within the marketing, they can contextualize it a certain way in the trailers and the posters, but hopefully after getting to the end of the movie, they're thinking of that title in a completely different way
Yes.
and understanding that this really informs a lot of the themes that we were trying to communicate in the first place.
It takes you on a journey, and that's my favorite. Absolutely. Are you in the process of working on something with James Wan?
I am working on something with James Wan and his producing partner, Michael Clear. This is an incredible movie. It's one of the best scripts I've ever read. I didn't write it. An incredible writer named Josh Rowlands wrote it. And it's a movie that if we could go make tomorrow, I would love to. It's brilliant, you know, and I think it's going to be so wonderful when we get to make it.
Amazing. Is there anything else you can tell us about it? Are you sworn to secrecy at the moment?
I think I'm mostly sworn to secrecy, but I can tell you that what made me so happy about it and what is just so incredible about it, it is a genre film that takes place in a Toys R Us. So that's what I can tell you. It's going to be so good. I'm so excited to make that film.
Oh my God, I can't wait to chat with you about that one when it's time.
Yes.
In the meantime, I just want to thank you and I want to congratulate you. I'm excited that this has been on the festival circuit, but now September 22nd, wide release. Everyone is going to go nuts for this, and I'm so excited for you. It's well
Thank
deserved,
you so
man.
much. I really appreciated this conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys.